Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday Focus. I'd like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Andrew Fowle, this morning. We said that this session we will be looking at research-informed school improvement. Andrew, welcome to the session.
Thank you.
Just as we begin, tell us a little about your journey and your experience, how we got to this question of why research-informed school improvement is so critical.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think my journey through schools, through education. I think this is my 35th year in schools, and starting in SEN, special educational needs, and moving through school leadership into headship. And I've been a head teacher for about 15 years, and now work in school improvement. My experiences for a lot of those years at school improvement, schools were sometimes meandering, idiosyncratic, and not really focused in terms of the goals that they set themselves, and more determined by external influences. And my experience of working overseas as well, I've done some work in West Africa and the North Americas, is that there is such a huge body of knowledge that we can bring to bear on how to improve schools, particularly influenced by the work of David Hopkins, who I've worked closely with around developing school improvement strategies that work, as we know, from Australia to England. So that's my sort of journey in a nutshell, the sort of lived experience of working through the system, seeing the system work not as well as it could. And then also my experience of working with research-informed practice that actually makes a difference. And I've seen that both in terms of my practice, but also in the practice overseas and in the practice in other schools where I've worked.
There's an interesting perspective there, isn't there, in the international perspective, because a lot of school improvement that we've dealt with, I mean, we work together and we talk about this, all the time. The school improvement in the context of compliance with external metrics. So, in England, that would be an Ofsted grade and performance measures. So I suppose the question is, what does the research kind of lead us to that's beyond an understanding of an Ofsted grade and a set of results? And you use that term, the lived experience. And I know, we talk a lot about the lived experience of the staff, well-being and so on, and the lived experience of the children and the opportunity and the aspirations that they hold, and that social contract between the community and the school and what they want of that process. How does it compare internationally? We can look and get very focused on England because that's where a lot of our work is. But how does it compare, that experience of schools improving?
I think the interesting thing in this respect is if you speak to almost all school leaders, and in fact all school teachers, that if you ask, why are you in education, why are you in schools, what are you attempting to do, what you always, or almost always, you get answers around, we want to improve the outcomes of young people, the quality of their lives, the well-being, we want to address the important societal issues. And if you have those conversations in Ghana, in Japan, in other places I've been to, you'll get the same answer, that the people are passionate about improving the quality of lives of young people and families. Yet when we often get into, so how are we going to improve our school? We very often, schools and systems of schools move into compliance models of we're going to do this by working around a certain metric, or we're going to comply. We need to be compliant with a framework which we're not necessarily sure how it achieves those ends. So I think the commonality across systems and across schools is sometimes this tension between knowing, this need to improve the school for for young people and families, and yet feeling constrained by a compliance framework which they almost have to attend to first. And I think the research informed practice that we base our work on indicates there are models of school improvement that focuses on the former and not the latter. And I think there is commonality across systems that now we know the fundamental components of how to improve a school and how to improve a system of schools. And I think, obviously the work of John Hattie and people like that give us clear indications that are applicable not just to a narrow focused compliance school improvement model, to a genuine, authentic one that can span different sectors of schools and also different systems of schools, both the ones that we know of and outside the UK.
So we talk about this school improvement landscape. I mean, obviously it's a social objective to have great schooling for the children for the next generation, because we know, the International Monetary Fund will tell us that they are investing in countries to improve their education system, because that's the way that there's sustainable growth. We know the EPI report is suggesting that, if we put more money into the English system, we'd see a multiple investment return. I think I read the other day, is it 19 billion? If they put 19 or 17 billion a year in, by later in this century, we would see a 95 billion pound return. So there's no doubt that investing in the system is going to produce outcomes, and it is about that base of quality provision for our young people, so that they start their working lives with the tools and aspirations to do something significant. And we know that that's, in Africa, that's certainly a mindset around, turning the sort of economic future of the country around. So, when we talk about research informed, so why a model? What we know, we've been in school leadership. There are lots of things out there that will tell us that there are systems for improving schools. Some of them work, some of them don't. Whether that's about application or whether it's about the model is open question. So there are lots of them. Why would we choose a particular model, and why get into modeling school improvement?
It's a really good question, Chris, in terms of why use a framework of I guess the question you're asking is perhaps around system leadership. Is that if we don't adopt a well thought out systematic approach to the complex activity of school improvement, in my experience, schools become derailed and become focused on things that aren't making the difference to the core business. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is sometimes the focus on a compliance model, we lose sight of what's important. Schools are really complicated places. And being a leader of a school, it's incredibly complicated. The schools that I'm literally working in at the moment, we are seeing successes in the schools I'm working in the moment, and we are working with in the moment, Chris, is because of that way we're systematizing the complexity of the school into operational, into ways that we can turn that vision and those values into discrete and clear ways of working. Because as our experience shows, there is this often disconnect between what we think we should be working at and what we actually do within schools. Why the school improvement model that you and I have been working on and developing? Firstly, it's evidence that it works. Like I've just said, the schools that we are applying the school improvement model to, it works. We've seen improvements, rapid improvements, schools improving in a whole set of ways. It's got a strong evidence base in terms of the work, like I said, particularly of Professor David Hopkins, who I would say was a leading light in terms of really bringing to bear the sort of academic rigor to school improvement. So I think, why the model? Well, clearly, like I've said, it has impact, it has academic integrity, and what's important is it's applicable in a whole set of systems. I think, like we said earlier, that particularly in the UK, as in all systems, we become very narrowly focused on just what's important to be compliant with a particular framework that only applies to a certain setting or country. So yeah, I would say evidence-based. We've seen it work in practice. We are, both you and I, Chris, are active practitioners working with school leaders on a day-to-day basis, applying knowledge of school improvement and seeing the results of it, which I think gives it the integrity.
And I'm sorry, it looked like the video froze for a moment there. I hope that didn't distract you, but it might be worth. It looks like it's done it again, but we'll get through that. I'm just going to share the image of the school improvement model that we're talking about, and maybe we could just get into. We're not going to go into the weeds with it, but let's just look at what that all of that. Just describe for us how we've got to this kind of format.
Yeah, I think boiling down to some core principles of school improvement, and people might say, well, this is self-evident and obvious. Well, yes and no. One would think it's self-evident and obvious, but again, my experience of working with schools with some school improvement that are just focused on compliance and frameworks. In the UK, the obvious one is that schools turn Ofsted framework into a school improvement model. So if we boil down the basics of school improvement, I think we come to three core components. Clearly, the cornerstone of school improvement is around improving the quality of teaching. It's almost goes without saying, but it's important to say, because when people talk about the quality of education or the quality, what do we actually mean about the quality of teaching? And again, research from Dylan William, etc., Hattie, all the neuroscience we understand about learning and teaching now is that we know the impact of high quality teaching. And when we talk about high quality teaching, clearly we mean the quality of the curriculum, the quality of instruction, and the quality of assessment. So we know that the quality of teaching has almost the greatest leverage on outcomes. Of course it does. And then connected easily to that is around the quality of leaders to enable that teaching to be in place, and instructional leadership, leadership of people, leadership of systems, the work that we know around the impact of high quality leaders from the work we do around attendance. We know that leadership has the greatest impact on school attendance. So we know that school leadership is one of those absolute core components or systems. And then finally, about the quality of systems, often I go into schools that they understand teaching, understand what leaders should be doing, but the quality of systems let them down. Like I said earlier, schools are complex and complicated places, and there is a difference between complexity and complicated. Complicated systems of layers of interrelated activities happening, and complexity about how there are unintended outcomes of ways systems interrelate with each other, both in a negative way and a positive way. So we need to think about systems, school systems, and systems that are across schools, because it's by that way that we put those three things together that we really get the rapid improvement of schools. So one can't focus on one aspect not without attending to the others. So from a potentially a simple system, Chris, we soon get into a dynamic system which needs really thinking about in terms of how we model improvement.
Just picking up on some of the things you said. So we've got a model here, which is a sort of tripartite a set of systems within school. So these systems that we talk about, we've got leadership and we've got teaching. What you've just described is that there is, I'm going to use the expression, a growing body of research evidence that informs each of those elements, because there has been a gap in real solid research and obviously we know now that the government is putting 10 million a year into EEF, or at least the EEF collection of research, and it's not to say that this is the only research body. It's really, what we're saying is there's a systematized approach to bringing good quality research into these three areas, so into teaching, into leadership. And actually that's probably leadership beyond the education system. So all our knowledge about what leadership looks like and how it operates in a modern organization, and then what systems work. I mean, you said as you were introducing teaching about its use of curriculum design, and you then went on to talk about attendance. We've done some work on that whole idea of, is the curriculum right to encourage learners to engage? And that's a key issue, and using things like the PASS model, so internal research, how children are responding, what do they think, almost customer satisfaction, but it's a research informed approach, so using quality data, and again we would then talk about the analytics and all that the analytics tell us about their behaviors, and that we've always done it that way against, well, what's right for now. So it's interesting to think about how all of those bits of research are influencing each of those areas. What's your, I've just kind of gone into that there, but what's your reaction there?
I think my reaction, Chris, is that in my experience of working with schools, sometimes schools become segmented in their thinking around certain aspects and become particularly narrowly focused on a particular aspect of school improvement, and fads and those sorts of things begin to take over. And you're absolutely right about what we know has the greatest impact. I guess the point I'm making is that same research informed approach to, say, pedagogical instruction or curriculum, or another aspect is that schools often use research informed approaches to that, but are less well versed in the totality of how how do we bring it all together into a coherent whole, so we are on a continuous improvement. So you and I and many people will have experienced way back to when schools have become particularly focused on a particular type of instruction or particular type of curriculum, and lose sight of how that connects into a holistic approach to school improvement. So we need research-informed processes, both in terms of the components of school improvement and the school improvement model as a whole. And I think that's our proposition at the moment, is how do we help schools, both in terms of the internal processes of school improvement, i.e. how do we improve the curriculum, how do we improve the pedagogy, how do we improve the assessment, how do we improve the leadership, but also how do we put all those things together so there is coherence. And I think that's the trick. There's no trick about it. That's what real embedded school improvement is about. System improvement is about not choosing one aspect. Yeah.
No, sorry, Andrew. I just gonna say I guess that's what I was trying to get us into, and it's because so many schools are saying, well, this piece of research tells us this, therefore this is what we need to do. What we're talking about is a strategic, systematized approach that is evaluating all of these. There will be priorities. There will be a start point. Talk a bit about that, the start point, because there is no, where do people come in?
Yeah, and this is again why the reductive model, I would argue, of the current English Ofsted framework is reductive, in the sense you're either here or you're here or you're here. And we know that walking into schools, which we do on a day-to-day basis, schools might be here in this aspect, but here, and that's a very oversimplification. So, and when I talked about complexity and the difference between complexity and complicated, we need to acknowledge that schools are at different positions in different areas, and that's a continuous changing picture. So your point about where do we go in, I think it's more about how do we understand the landscape of the school, what's going on, what's really going on in this school, in all the different components that make the biggest difference. And that's a nuanced approach. And because it's difficult to do, often schools don't do it. So answering your question, where's the starting point? The starting point is you would expect me to say, is by having clear, informed information, analytical information, so we understand where we are in schools and all these different components, rigor, clarity of position, so we can build a picture of where schools are in terms of a whole range of components, factors, whichever we want to call it. And I think schools really do need to understand and invest in the time, because of the nature of schools being so complicated, it's quite easy to become just focused on an aspect. What will do school improvement, will improve the quality of assessment. That's our focus. We are going to rewrite a curriculum and implement a new curriculum, and not understanding the reason why it's not working is because the thought hasn't been given to all the other factors. So the way in is by understanding what's going on, and the best way to understand about what's going on in the school is to understand the lived experience of children. So to describe where a school is, we need to understand, when we talk about the lived experience of children, is what is the hour by hour, day by day, week by week, term by term, year by year experience of children, with a whole set of children with disabilities, children with special educational needs, children with high priority in particular areas. So that gives us the starting point, the lived experience of the children, for us then to explore using a systematized, analytic way of what's going on in the school.
So what does that what's it look like? I mean, we've modeled this with a number of schools. How so we've got these dimensions. What's it actually going to feel like for a school? Take us through kind of examples of how that's felt, what it's looked like for schools that are on that improvement journey. And I don't just mean the special measures to outstanding kind of journey, though, because there are lots, as you just said, there's lots of different contexts and there's lots of different start points. And it could be that it's a school that's outstanding that wants to stay outstanding, but demographics have changed in their area, or the choice of children are changing. But that's so that there's a wide range, and that's very English in the way I've just described that, because that's the system that we spend a lot of time in. But that's not to every system that we've talked through. What does it feel like? What does it look like for school leaders?
I think, in my experience, I've been ahead of different size secondary schools in different contexts. A large secondary school in a very deprived context, a smaller rural schools, primary schools. And my immediate answer to you, Chris, what does it feel like? It feels overwhelming. It feels overwhelming to try, particularly for new heads, but also experienced heads, to try and build a picture of what the school looks like, so to know how to improve it. And that sounds almost sort of simple and trite, and potentially, well, of course head teachers know how to improve their school. Yes, they do, of course they do. And head teachers, what I'm saying is I'm not trying to downplay this. Certainly when I was a new head teacher, I found it very overwhelming. So what do I do next? How do I improve it? What do I focus on? Where am I in this school improvement journey? I've got a category, or I've got an Ofsted grading. Is my sole focus just getting it from A to B? I've got a set of performance indicators that are published in the national press. Do I just focus on those? Or do I take the time to collect evidence, the self-improving school model? Do I take the time to really dig deep into the lived experience of children, into the systems, into the quality of leadership, to give me a clear journey through? I would say, sorry, Chris, I'm about to run out of battery. Just give me 1 second. I do apologise.
No, it's practical. Just while Andrew's doing that, if you're on LinkedIn and you can see us, and thank you for joining us this morning. If you've got any comments or questions, just drop them in the feed, and then we'll do what we can to answer those questions once Andrew has finished the presentation, and once we finish the conversation. But if there's anything that you want to ask, or there's any questions that you have about the system, please just drop some comments in the chat. Andrew, are you okay?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Apologies.
No, it's the practicalities of doing this in the way we do it these days.
Yeah, I'm in rural Suffolk, and sometimes technology lets us down in rural Suffolk. And with sort of making a joke of it, the constraints to school improvement, the reality of leaders in a day-to-day in school. Where is the time coming from? You talked about how we go about this. The school leaders live busy lives. The day-to-day reality of sorting laptops out, to sorting buses out, to sorting HR issues out, to sorting finance out, health and safety. We can become overwhelmed, and that focus on school improvement. How do we always bring it back to what is it helping the school improve? And hence, this is what I'm arguing, and very much, I've talked a lot about David Hopkins, about applying a clear model of school improvement that enables leaders to think with clarity and purpose about all aspects of how we improve our school. And I think that's what I've been working on in my own work, and that's what we've been working on, Chris, is how do we support leaders in schools, bring a structure and a system to school improvement that has the integrity, but really working with a school, alongside a school, and with school leaders to be able to do this, as opposed to the punitive models that some of the frameworks apply. So it's about working alongside with people, really helping them get to the core of what's going on in their school, and a real focus on a systematized approach to improving schools. Does that sort of explain it?
Yeah. I just being practical with people that are listening, I think that aspect of bringing capacity. I know, from my own experience, if you're working in a challenging area, or whether it's challenging because of staffing, finding staff, whether it's because the community is a disrupted community and there are all sorts of things going on, you're firefighting every day. So the focus on school improvement is great. It's theoretically what we want to do, but practically every day there are things happening that take your attention away. As you said, the fire alarms go off, and all the young people are outside, and that happens 3 or 4 times a day. I remember in one of my experiences, that was it, and there was every challenge that you can think of that was going on so all that high thinking around, we are here to improve the school, we need and concentrate on those practices. There are times when, I mean, I know, as we you've been saying, the schools that we are working with now, that they're, I want to say that this is not just a secondary thing; it's a cross phase. Primary, nursery through to, post 16. These practices, although the context might be different, but there are people with specialist understanding, and you're there to lead the school. Sometimes you just need some capacity to be able to keep that focus going, but also to help get the clarity of thinking, because your thinking is so caught up with keeping stakeholders, keeping children, keeping the parents, the community, the teaching body, all of those people. You can't afford to lose them. That they are your lifeblood. If you haven't got children sitting on seats, then there will be no funding. Having that capacity is not to be underrated, to be ignored. You cannot necessarily do it just on your own. Superman might exist out there, but it will drive you into the ground if that's the challenge is large. You do need capacity, and it's not about niche people that do one thing. It's about having the perspective you've just talked about, and I guess that's one of the things we are kind of leading in this, isn't it? It's getting that big view of where does this organization fit within its community, what does it need to do for this community, and how does this then work within the school environment. And I guess that's an international thing, and in some of the conversations we've been having recently is it's not just about a world-class school, as it's that word is used, this thing about this institution in this small community has this standing. Well, that's great if you can be that, and if all the things fall together to make that thing, but you do need the skills, you need the people, you need the capacity and the insight to bring all of that together. Does that ring true, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I think the insight and also the capacity to think are scant resources often in our busy days. Both. I worked as a head in a primary school with 60 children, in a couple more informal, and also in a big high school with 1,200 children. And the challenges seem so different. Actually, if you the same clear school improvement model apply, and it's about and how we can help and support schools. And I'm very passionate about this because, passionate because I've been there and done that, but also passionate that there are clear ways. We know stuff now that 20, 30 years ago we didn't know. We know things that work, and it's things have improved to the point that we understand things in a much greater detail that we didn't before, and I think that there are things that work, and we know they work. There's examples that I've been in schools very recently when we really seen concrete evidence of system improvement, underlying improvement in schools that wouldn't have happened had we not taken the approach that we've taken. Really concrete examples of what we've done in using this approach to make the difference to young people and children's lives. We've seen it have a direct impact, and I think we know it works, Chris. I think in simple terms, yeah.
And I come back to your experience. I mean, we're not, you've worked in a number of multi-academy trusts. You've worked across the country. You've worked across the phases. It's an approach that we've applied to education organisations. And I know, and we've alluded to international work, but from the Bahamas to Africa to other parts of the world. We've got this idea. I mean, I'd say, obviously, with the analytics, it's often true that, a school is a collection of groups of children with an adult, whatever specialism they're teaching, whatever number that group of children is, whether it's 60 in the Far East or 25 or 24 in Luton, makes no difference. It's still that setup. So all of this works in all of those contexts. Can I just I know I don't want to get into the weeds of what the model looks like, but I would like just to sort of talk about what that journey is. So you've used the word, the kind of idiosyncratic start point, and we know that the kind of got the ambition of every leader is to be, you're an innovator. You're that's that. So I'm just going to put it on the screen in terms of the model process. Just talk, how we've got to this. I'm just going to make it. So just carry, respond. I'm just going to make it a little bigger so people can see it. But just how do we get to this?
Yeah, well, I think we've got to this through a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, a lot of practical application, and a lot of school work ourselves, Chris. And it seemed to us, seemed to you and I, in lots of discussions, lots of academic work that we've undertaken ourselves, and a lot of reading, but I think mostly walking into schools as teachers, walking into schools as leaders, and walking into schools as school improvement partners, that there is a clear sense, and I'm sure people listening will know this, there's a feel about a school. And what we've tried to do is really describe that sense you get. And the idiosyncratic school, and I hate the word failing school and inadequate and those terms, because I can't think of any school leader that actively makes their school inadequate. So idiosyncratic, that both at an individual level in a school, the idiosyncratic teacher does what they want to do in them. They work in their own particular way. They don't follow any particular school processes. We all know that idiosyncratic teacher, the one that, the perhaps the charismatic one, or perhaps the one that just doesn't follow. Then we get to the idiosyncratic departments within a secondary school, or a phase within a primary school or a special school, where the science department or the key stage one, they just do their own thing. And then you get that idiosyncratic school or school leadership that just sort of grab things or is just focus on one particular thing. There's no clarity of thinking, and we move through a model, and this is a quality improvement model that is not just applied to schools, but we go through define schools and practitioners being more defined in their roles to being refined. And we can go into the difference of this, but I think where in different areas of the three-part system, which we're talking about, leadership systems and teaching, we can see schools at different places. But what we know of that if schools really want to be innovative, that you can't be innovative in one area with other areas being idiosyncratic or less well defined. So it's about having a clarity of the journey we're on, not being defined by external metrics, not being defined by external compliance frameworks like in the UK, but a model of a journey which is clearly defined, and then being explicit about the components of what we mean by the components of leadership, what we mean by components of systems, and what we mean by the components of teaching. And the first stop, you talked earlier about the way in. Clearly, the way in is evidence informed. So how do we get evidence around the quality of teaching, the quality of systems, quality of leadership? And that's that self-evaluative process, using analytics, using data to inform where we are or where schools are on this journey. And it's schools, in my experience, can be spiky, but what we tend to find is when leadership is idiosyncratic, systems and teaching often are as well. And I think it's giving a clear framework of enabling schools to move through this process. And it's never static. The innovation that is required for a school when I started teaching in the late 1980s, there's a completely different set of challenges to the climate crisis we're in, the recruitment crisis we're in, the cost of living crisis we're in. So the innovation, the attendance crisis we're in. So the innovation needed around those challenges are different to when I started teaching. And what we know is when teachers, the leaders of tomorrow, will be facing completely different challenges that aren't even defined as yet. So what we've done here is to be clear and precise in our definitions of how we define where schools are, and then how do we know? So it's not just some random one-day judgment. It is a thought-out, evidence-informed judgment, and that then there is a clear pathway from moving. So how do you move from a refined process of leadership to an innovative system of leadership within a school? And that's where the capacity to think about this is often lost in the day-to-day busyness of schools. Does that
yeah,
is
it
that
does.
clear?
I just came to mind as you were talking, Andrew, we've been into many schools and they'll say, well, this is an innovation, or it was innovative until that person left. And that's, it's that sense of systematizing, so don't just rely on an individual. Where's the succession plan? So when this person chooses to move up through the system or to move on to another school, then you lose that body of knowledge, and it's that loss moves you from kind of what was innovative to idiosyncratic. It was, and it can be that stark because it's all invested in a person, because we're not thinking about why does that innovation fit within our organization and how are we investing in it. And if we don't invest beyond that individual, who then is the classic position, you got this great young person that's come in that does these wonderful things, they're then poached or I use that term advisedly, they're drawn into another role, and you've lost that to your organization and nobody else has been invested in to follow that through. And that's the reality of the change.
Chris,
sorry, yeah, cool.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I mean, this is such a good example, and I'll just give you a little snippet of a conversation I overheard in a school recently. Literally, the conversation was, we are going to need to change our curriculum. Why? Because the Progress 8 measures aren't going to be used to measure our school. The Progress 8 measures are no longer going to be used to judge our school. So we're going to have to change our curriculum to make sure that our curriculum fits the new performance measures. There was no conversation around, is it the right curriculum for the young people? What's the efficacy of the curriculum? And it was, so we are only innovating around our curriculum to ensure that it's compliant with a set of performance metrics that the UK government are going to change. And this is the risk. We're coming back to the beginning. This is the risk of having a compliant model of school improvement that is dependent upon external metrics determining whether you're good or not. If we reject that model and say school improvement is a different activity, then we need a much more robust, evidence-informed, research-based approach. Hence, the framework that we've developed.
And we've got to say at that point that the government's position is that they are only pausing it for 2 years. We don't know what will happen, obviously, if the government
absolutely.
And those that are watching Friday Focus, just look out for the last blog, because I talked about progress measures, and we know there is conversation about what the Labour, if they get in, will do. Keir Starmer's speech suggests. I mean, To me, it looks like it's going to get more complex if they do what they're saying at the moment. I'd like to see it less complex. We don't need. I suppose that's the question. You know, if the performance measures change, what will the curriculum be? How will people respond? And the truth is, next year's year 10 are going to be into the next government. So, you know, what their experience is going to look like. So it's that what you've just illustrated is that knee-jerk reaction now. You know, not ignoring all of the background values and intent around it. It's that question of, well, we were so driven by outcomes and you know, grading, but you know that we don't. There's no criticism in any way of any leader doing that, because they're, you know, that jobs are on the line when that's another question. Andrew, look, we've talked for 45 minutes. It's been really interesting to get into. So really, what we're saying is there, you know, smart curriculum, us working together, us as individuals working with schools, we work to this model. It's something that we've been working on for some time. We're looking to introduce it electronically into the analytics in the next academic year. But in terms of the process, it's really interesting to see how, you know, that idea of research informed practice is becoming more embedded as we're investing in research. At this point, I can't see any commentary in the line of questioning, so I hope we've the video's frozen again. I hope we've covered all that would be of interest to you. So can I just thank Andrew for his input. What I'm just going to leave on the screen as we move out, and Andrew referred to the work of David Hopkins, and it just so happens that today David's new book, Unleashing Greatness, which is such a great title for this idea of school improvement. So David Hopkins' new book, Unleashing Greatness, is out today on, so you can buy it on Amazon if you're interested. I think there's also so there's a paperback version or a Kindle version, depending on how you read. And not just because we're focusing on David's work, but I'd also, one that I'm reading at the moment that I would connect. I would, if you're interested in school improvement, I'm just going to put a shout out to Matt Pittman and the Connection Curriculum, because an Australian school leader who's done a lot of work on actually joining up it's about the vision aspect of school, so joining up what's going on with school with that wider picture. And he talks about making it sustainable, not just in the sense of energy sustainability, but the whole idea of curriculum is changing. So I commend to you these two books, Unleashing Greatness by David Hopkins, Professor David Hopkins, and The Connection Curriculum by Matt Pittman. If you're a reader and you need some input, I strongly recommend those two books. But again, Andrew, thank you for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
We're going to finish there, and I wish you a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.